The air on Zaharian Imperial Station Alpha 9 carried the metallic tang that came with recycled atmosphere, a constant reminder of the artificial environment that had become home to Admiral Kextel for the better part of 2 decades. The station hung at the edge of a known space, a dark silhouette against the nebula backdrop. Its sharp angles and protruding weapon arrays a testament to the Empire's military might. Admiral Kextel stood before the massive holodisplay that dominated the command center, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, spine straight despite his advancing years. 40 years of conquest had etched deep lines into his gray-scaled face. But his 4 eyes, trademark of purebred Zaharians, remained sharp, constantly assessing, analyzing. Status report," he commanded, voice carrying the weight of authority that came with his rank. Commander Veltar stepped forward, her slender form moving with precision as she manipulated the holo-controls. Unlike the Admiral, she had risen through scientific ranks before transferring to command, a fact that occasionally created tension between them. "All sectors reporting normal activity?" "Admiral," she said. "The Orion Quadrant remains secure, and our patrols have encountered nothing of significance in the past 36 cycles." Kextel nodded, satisfaction evident in his posture. 20 years of unchallenged peace at this frontier station had bred a comfortable routine. The Empire expanded, lesser species submitted or were subjugated, and the great Zaharian war machine continued its inexorable progress across the galaxy. The junior officers moved with quiet efficiency around them, monitoring systems, relaying orders to distant patrols. Occasionally, one would approach with a report requiring higher authorization, but mostly, the command center hummed with the predictable rhythm of Imperial order. "The War Council will convene via holographic conference in 10 minutes, Veltar reminded him. "They're expecting your quarterly assessment of frontier defenses." "They'll receive the same report as last quarter," Kextel said dismissively. "Our position remains unassailable." Veltar hesitated, then spoke in a lower tone. "There are rumors, Admiral, that the Emperor is considering resource reallocation. Some believe we've reached the practical limits of expansion and should consolidate rather than push further." Kextel's upper eyes narrowed, while his lower pair remained fixed on the display. "Politicians and bureaucrats. What do they know of securing an empire? Every generation thinks they've reached some imaginary limit until visionaries push beyond it." The conversation might have continued, but a sharp, insistent alarm cut through the ambient noise of the command center. Every head turned toward the central display, where a small, pulsing indicator had appeared at the edge of their sensor range. "Report!" Kextel barked, all traces of complacency vanishing. A young officer's fingers flew across her console. "Unknown vessel, sir. It just appeared. No jump signature, no hyperspace distortion. It's just there." That's impossible," Veltar said, moving quickly to verify the readings herself. "Nothing can enter real space without some form of transition signature." But the evidence pulsed before them, undeniable. A vessel of unknown configuration had somehow materialized within their security perimeter without triggering any of the standard detection systems designed to identify approaching ships. Kextel's reaction was immediate and by the book. "Launch Interceptor Squadron Zapir 3. Full combat protocols. I want weapons hot but held unless I give direct authorization." As the orders echoed through the command chain, the holographic display zoomed in on the intruder. The ship defied conventional design principles, a smooth, almost organic shape with no visible propulsion systems, weapons, or even standard communication arrays. It gleamed with a peculiar iridescence that seemed to shift as they watched. "Size comparison indicates a small to medium vessel," Veltar reported, professional demeanor masking her fascination. "Likely a scout or explorer class, though nothing matching known registry in our databases." The War Council notification chimed, but Kexthal silenced it with a gesture. Inform them we have a situation developing. This takes precedence. On the display, 3 Zephyrian fighters approach the unknown vessel. Their sleek, predatory forms, designed to project both speed and lethal intent. Standard first contact protocol dictated a show of force followed by communication attempts. The Zaharian way of establishing dominance from the outset. Interceptors reaching optimal range in 15 seconds, announced the tactical officer. What happened next would be reviewed, analyzed, and debated in Zaharian military academies for generations to come. As the fighters closed within 1,000 kilometers of the unknown vessel, their systems simultaneously failed. Not catastrophically. There were no explosions. No loss of life, but comprehensively. Weapons, propulsion, communication, even life support switched to emergency backup power, as every primary system simply shut down. "They're being scanned," Veltar said, incredulity evident in her voice as she interpreted the incoming data. "But not by any method we recognize. It's as if the other ship is somehow reading the very quantum states of our vessel's components." Kexthal's face remained impassive. Decades of military discipline preventing any show of the alarm he felt. "Pull them back, now." "We can't, sir. Communications are down and they're drifting on emergency power." For several tense moments, the command center fell silent as they watched their helpless fighters float near the mysterious vessel. Then, as suddenly as they had failed, the systems on all 3 interceptors came back online. "Oh, fighters reporting full restoration of functionality," the communications officer announced. Relief evident in his voice. "Squadron leader requests immediate permission to withdraw to safe distance." "Granted," Kexthal said without hesitation. His pride demanded retaliation for such a display of technological superiority. But 40 years of combat experience had taught him when to retreat and regroup. As the interceptors pulled away, the unknown vessel remained motionless, making no aggressive moves, sending no communications. It simply existed in space, a silent challenge to everything the Zaharians thought they knew about their technological supremacy. "Admiral," Veltar said quietly, "the data packets from our fighters, they're unlike anything I've seen. Whatever scanned them didn't just read our systems. It accessed everything. Weapon specifications, tactical databases, even the sealed Imperial military archives stored in the fighters' black boxes." Kexthal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep disturbance among his kind. "Are you suggesting this vessel broke our highest-level encryption in seconds?" "Not broke, sir," Veltar corrected, her scientific background evident in her precision. The encryption wasn't defeated. It was simply irrelevant to them. It's as if they operate on principles that make our security measures as meaningful as a paper barrier. Before Kexthal could respond, another officer called out, "Admiral, we're detecting unusual space-time distortions around the vessel. Our sensors can't quite interpret the readings, but it appears they're bending local space somehow." The implications crashed through Kexthal's mind like a wave. If this unknown species could manipulate space-time itself, their technological advantage wasn't just significant, it was almost godlike in comparison to Zaharian capabilities. "Open a secured channel to High Command," he ordered, his voice deliberately steady. "Priority Alpha, and get me everything we have on recent scientific advances in space-time manipulation." As his crew scrambled to obey, Kexthal faced the holographic image of the vessel that had, in mere minutes, shattered 2 decades of complacency. For the first time since his early combat days, he felt something he had almost forgotten: fear. 3 hours later, Kexthal stood rigidly before the assembled War Council, their holographic forms arranged in a semicircle that somehow made him feel more exposed than facing enemy fire. Emperor Zarhul himself presided, his massive form and elaborate ceremonial armor dominating the virtual space. "Explain again," the Emperor commanded, "how a single vessel paralyzed 3 of our most advanced fighters without firing a shot." Kextel had spent the intervening hours reviewing the data with Veltar and a team of the station's best analysts. What they had discovered had only deepened his concern. "The evidence suggests, Your Eminence, that this vessel, which we now believe to be of human origin, possesses technology that allows direct manipulation of quantum fields. They didn't disable our ships through conventional electronic warfare. They simply adjusted the quantum states of key components, rendering them temporarily inoperable." A murmur ran through the assembled military leaders. Quantum theory was well understood in Zaharian science, but practical applications remained largely theoretical. "Humans?" The Emperor's tone conveyed disdain. "The bipedal species from the Sol system? Our intelligence indicated they were at least a century behind our technological level." "Evidently," Kextel replied carefully. "Our intelligence was flawed." Commander Veltar stepped forward. Having been granted temporary speaking privileges due to her scientific expertise, "We believe we are witnessing an example of technological discontinuity, Your Eminence. Rather than advancing incrementally along the same technological path as the Empire, the humans appear to have pursued an entirely different approach to physics and engineering." "In simple terms," interrupted Admiral Vaucher, a notorious warhawk among the High Command, "what are their offensive capabilities?" Veltar hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "We ran simulations based on the observed data. If they can manipulate quantum states at will and bend spacetime locally, then theoretically, they could disable any Zaharian vessel or weapon system instantaneously. Force shields, energy weapons, even our most advanced matter-antimatter technologies would be irrelevant." The silence that followed was profound. "Theoretical capabilities are one thing," Admiral Vaucher countered. "Actual military application is another. I propose we assemble a battle group and determine the true extent of their abilities." Kextel felt a surge of anger at such foolhardiness. "With respect, Admiral, sending more ships against an adversary that can neutralize our technology at will would be an exercise in futility at best. Suicidal at worst. You speak of caution when the honor of the Empire is at stake." Vaucher's accusation hung in the air, a direct challenge to Kextel's courage. It was Veltar who responded, her scientific detachment cutting through the military posturing. "We've run a tactical simulation. Admiral Vaucher, would you care to see the results?" Without waiting for permission, she activated a secondary holographic display. It showed a detailed battle scenario. A full Zaharian fleet, 10,000 ships strong, including dreadnoughts, carriers, and fighter squadrons, engaged against a single vessel of the type currently observing them. The simulation played out in seconds. As the Zaharian forces approached attack range, space itself seemed to ripple around the human vessel. In the next instant, every Zaharian ship simply stopped, weapons offline, propulsion dead, communication silenced. "This simulation assumes they wish to disable rather than destroy," Veltar noted clinically. "If their intent were hostile, the result would likely be far worse." Emperor Zarhul leaned forward, his massive form seeming to fill the holographic projection. "How long would such an engagement last, Commander?" "Based on observed capabilities, Your Eminence," Veltar replied, her voice steady. "Approximately 2.3 seconds. Another silence, heavier than the first. "And what," the Emperor finally asked, "does this vessel do now? It has encountered us, demonstrated its superiority, and yet makes no demands. Initiates no communication." This was the question that had occupied Kextel's thoughts since the initial encounter. The behavior pattern matched no known species in their extensive records of conquest and diplomacy. "They're observing," he said slowly, the realization crystallizing as he spoke. Like scientists studying a previously unknown life form, they neutralized our fighters not as an act of aggression, but to examine our technology, the way we might disable a primitive weapon to study it safely. The implications of his statement rippled through the assembly. For a species that had defined itself by military conquest for millennia, the notion of being regarded as a curiosity rather than a threat struck at the very foundation of their identity. "You're suggesting," Admiral Voshar said incredulously, "that they don't see us as a worthy adversary, that we're some kind of experiment to them?" Before Kextel could respond, the communications officer interrupted with an urgent message. "Admiral, the vessel is moving." All attention immediately shifted to the tactical display. The human ship had indeed begun to move, accelerating smoothly, without any visible propulsion exhaust or energy signature. "Tracking trajectory," Veltar reported, fingers dancing across the controls. "They appear to be—" "Wait, that can't be right." "Report, Commander," Kextel demanded. "They're achieving velocities far beyond anything in our records, sir. But there's no sign of a jump to hyperspace or any known faster-than-light method. It's as if they're simply accelerating through normal space at impossible speeds." They watched in stunned silence as the vessel rapidly shrank on their displays, the sensor readings becoming increasingly uncertain until, finally, it vanished beyond their detection range. "They're gone," Kextel said, stating the obvious because someone needed to break the silence. "They came, they looked, they left." Emperor Zarhul's voice, when he finally spoke, carried none of its usual imperial certainty. "Admiral Kextel, you will prepare a complete analysis of this encounter and present your recommendations within 24 hours. This council is adjourned." As the holographic projections winked out one by one, Kextel turned to find Veltar still studying the last known coordinates of the human vessel. Her expression troubled. "They didn't even consider us worth communicating with," she said quietly. "We've conquered 27 systems, subjugated dozens of species, and they dismissed us as casually as we might ignore an insect." For the first time in his long career, Kextel had no ready response. The universe had suddenly become a much larger, much more frightening place. Zos. Captain Jake Morrison stretched his lanky frame in the command chair of the Earth exploratory vessel Curiosity, suppressing a yawn as he reviewed the sensor logs from their brief encounter with the alien vessels. "So what's the verdict, Amy?" he asked, glancing over at Dr. Amy Stone, the ship's chief xenoanthropologist. "Another warrior culture with delusions of grandeur?" Dr. Stone didn't immediately look up from her data tablet, her dark eyes scanning the information with practiced efficiency. At 45, she was considered young for her position, but 15 years studying non-human civilizations had given her insights that more experienced academics often missed. "Zaharians," she confirmed, finally looking up. "They match the behavioral and technological profile we've observed in 3 other sectors. Classic Type 2 expansionist society, technologically capable of limited interstellar travel, but culturally unable to move beyond conquest as their primary mode of interaction." Morrison nodded, familiar with the classification system. Humanity had been cataloging the various civilizations they encountered since achieving their own breakthrough in space-time manipulation 50 years earlier. "Aggressive response to contact?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the sensor logs. "Standard intimidation approach," Dr. Stone confirmed. 3 fighters, weapons charged but not fired. Probably their version of saying hello. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I imagine they were quite surprised when we said hello back." Morrison chuckled. The Curiosity's automated defense systems had temporarily adjusted the quantum states of the alien vessel's key components, not damaging them, just briefly suspending their functionality while gathering data. "Their technology is actually quite impressive for their development stage," noted Chief Engineer Patel from his station across the bridge. "Sophisticated antimatter containment, decent shield harmonics. They're just working with an outdated paradigm. Like trying to build a better steam engine when everyone else has switched to electric," Morrison offered. "Precisely," Patel agreed. "They're pushing conventional physics to its limits without making the conceptual leap to manipulation principles." Dr. Stone set her tablet down. "The real question is whether they'll make that leap now. First contact with significantly advanced technology can go two ways for societies at their stage. It either crushes their spirit or catalyzes dramatic progress." Morrison considered this as he gazed at the starfield on the main view screen. In the 50 years since humanity had achieved its technological breakthrough, they had encountered dozens of other species at various stages of development. Their policy of minimal intervention had been established early: observe, record, occasionally nudge, but never directly interfere. "Did we scare them too badly?" he asked, genuinely concerned. Despite the vast technological gap, he had no desire to traumatize an emerging civilization. Dr. Stone shrugged. "Hard to say. Their military leader, the one with 4 eyes, showed remarkable composure. There was fear there, certainly, but also calculation, adaptation. That's promising." "Should we have tried communication?" Morrison wondered aloud. It was always the hardest call to make: when to establish direct contact and when to simply observe and move on. "Their culture isn't ready," Dr. Stone said firmly. "Their entire social structure is built around military hierarchy and conquest. Genuine exchange requires at least some conceptual framework for equality. They don't have that yet." Morrison nodded, trusting her judgment. "Plot a course to the next survey point. Raj," he instructed the navigation officer. "Let's give our friends some time to process what they've seen." As the Curiosity prepared to shift into manipulated space-time, Morrison spared one last thought for the aliens they'd encountered. He genuinely hoped they'd make the leap, from conquest to curiosity, from domination to discovery. Some species never did. "Transition in 5 seconds," announced the navigation officer. Morrison settled back in his chair, already turning his attention to their next destination. The galaxy was vast, and humanity's exploration had barely begun. Back on Zaarian Imperial Station Alpha 9, the atmosphere in the Strategic Planning Center was electric with tension. The Empire's finest military minds and scientific advisors had gathered, both in person and via holographic projection, to analyze the human encounter and determine a response. Admiral Kexthal stood before the assembled experts, his formal report complete, waiting now for the inevitable debate to begin. He didn't have to wait long. "This changes nothing," declared Admiral Vosher, his holographic form seeming to vibrate with intensity. "One advanced vessel does not negate millennia of Zaharian military supremacy. We must increase production of our newest Dreadnought class and expand the fleet by at least 30%. Several military leaders nodded in agreement, but Kexthal noticed the scientists exchanging skeptical glances. He had spent the hours since the encounter reviewing historical records of technological disparities between civilizations, and the patterns were disturbingly consistent. "With respect, Admiral," Kexthal said carefully, "building more ships based on our current technology would be like arming ourselves with additional spears after discovering our adversary possesses energy weapons." "So you advocate surrender?" Voshar's accusation cut through the room. "I advocate understanding," Kexthal countered, surprising himself with the words. "Whatever principles the humans are using to manipulate space-time and quantum states, They represent a fundamental advance beyond our current science. We need to redirect resources from fleet expansion to basic research. The uproar was immediate and predictable. The Zaharian Empire had expanded through conquest for so long that its military and political structures were inextricably intertwined. Suggesting a pivot away from military spending was tantamount to heresy. Commander Veltar stepped forward, her slender form seeming fragile among the assembled military leaders. But her voice carried conviction. We've completed our analysis of the sensor data from the encounter. The human vessel didn't actually generate any form of energy we could detect. Instead, it appeared to be reshaping the underlying structure of space-time itself. She activated a holographic simulation that showed waves of distortion emanating from a representation of the human ship. They're not pushing against space the way our drives do. They're folding it, creating shortcuts through dimensions we barely understand theoretically. One of the scientists, a theoretical physicist whose name Kextel couldn't recall, spoke up. What Commander Veltar is describing would require a completely novel understanding of quantum gravity, a unified theory that we've been pursuing for centuries without success. And this helps us how? Demanded Voshar. Scientific curiosity is well and good in peacetime, but we're facing a potential existential threat. Kextel felt a flash of insight, cutting through decades of military conditioning. No, he said firmly, we're not. All eyes turned to him. The humans could have destroyed our fighters, or this station, with trivial ease. They didn't. They studied us and left. They don't perceive us as a threat. He paused, the next words difficult for a lifetime warrior to speak. And they're right. Silence fell over the assembly as the implications sank in. I've ordered a full tactical simulation, Kextel continued, pressing his advantage. Not just ship-to-ship combat, but a comprehensive strategic analysis of how a conflict with such a technologically superior force would unfold. At his signal, Veltar activated the simulation. The holographic display expanded to show the entire Zaharian Empire, 27 star systems, hundreds of military installations, thousands of ships arrayed against a mere handful of vessels using the technology they had observed. The simulation began with standard Zaharian doctrine, concentrated fleet action against key targets. But as their virtual forces engaged, the human vessels simply ignored conventional physics. They appeared simultaneously in multiple locations, rendered massive weapon platforms inert without firing a shot, and moved through supposedly impenetrable defenses as if they weren't there. Within minutes of simulated time, the entire Zaharian military had been neutralized, not destroyed. The simulation assumed the humans would show the same restraint they had during the actual encounter, but utterly incapacitated. This can't be accurate, Vosher protested, but his objection lacked conviction. The simulation uses conservative estimates, Veltar replied calmly. If anything, it likely overestimates our effectiveness. Kextel let the implications hang in the air for a long moment before continuing. We have always defined ourselves through military power, the ability to bend others to our will through force. We now face a species that renders that approach obsolete. They don't need to fight us to defeat us. Our weapons, our tactics, our entire strategic doctrine is irrelevant against their capabilities. Then what do you propose, Admiral? The question came from Emperor Zarhul himself, who had been silently observing the proceedings. Kextel took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest went against everything he had believed throughout his long military career. We must transform the Empire, not through conquest, but through understanding. I propose an immediate reallocation of resources from military expansion to scientific research, with the goal of comprehending and eventually replicating the principles behind human technology. The stunned silence that followed was broken by a slow, deliberate chuckle from an unexpected source. Grand Scientist Mavrex, the Empire's most distinguished physicist, whose holographic form flickered at the edge of the assembly. After 60 years trying to convince the Imperial Council to fund basic research, the ancient scientist said, his voice cracking with age. It takes an existential crisis to finally get your attention. How very Zaharian of us. You find this amusing, scientist? Vusher demanded. I find it illuminating, Mavrex countered. For generations, I and others like me have argued that the true path to power lies not in conquest, but in understanding the fundamental nature of reality. You dismissed us as impractical dreamers, while pouring resources into increasingly marginal improvements to the same basic technologies. The old scientist's eyes gleamed. And now, confronted with beings who have taken the path we advocated, you finally begin to see. Emperor Zarhul rose from his virtual throne, his massive form dominating the projection. You speak of abandoning the very principles that built our empire. Admiral Kextel, I speak of survival. Your Eminence, Kextel replied, meeting the Emperor's gaze steadily. And beyond survival, advancement. The humans have shown us a door to a level of understanding we never imagined possible. We can continue down our current path and become irrelevant, or we can transform and perhaps one day stand as their equals. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Prepare detailed recommendations for this transformation. I will convene the full Imperial Council in 3 days' time. With that, his holographic form vanished, followed quickly by the others, until only Kextel, Veltar, and a handful of station personnel remained. That, Veltar said quietly, was either the bravest or most foolhardy speech I've ever heard. Kextel's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as the tension of the moment finally released. Perhaps both. But having seen what we've seen, how could we continue as before? Veltar studied him curiously. You've changed, Admiral. A month ago, you would have been leading the calls for military response. Kextel considered this, surprising himself with a small laugh. A month ago, I was a confident fool. Now I am merely a fool who recognizes his ignorance, and that, Commander, is the beginning of wisdom. Together, they turned to the monumental task of reimagining an empire built on conquest as one driven by discovery instead. 3 days later, Emperor Zarhul stood before the full Imperial Council, military leaders, planetary governors, industrial magnates, and scientific advisors, in the vast ceremonial chamber at the heart of the Imperial Palace on Zaharia Prime. The room, with its soaring ceilings and ancient battle trophies, had witnessed countless declarations of war and celebrations of conquest over the millennia. Today, it would witness something altogether different. We face a choice. The Emperor began without preamble, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. Continue as we have for generations, or chart a new course for our civilization. The assembled leaders murmured among themselves, already divided into factions, following the dissemination of Admiral Kextel's report. The military hardliners, led by Admiral Voshar, had been lobbying aggressively for increased defense spending and accelerated warship production. The scientific community, energized by the possibility of paradigm-shifting research funding, advocated for a complete restructuring of imperial priorities. Admiral Kextel, the Emperor continued, has proposed the most radical transformation of our society since the founding of the Empire itself. Before we proceed, I have ordered one final analysis. At his signal, A new holographic simulation appeared in the center of the chamber. Unlike the combat scenarios shown previously, this depicted something more profound. A civilization-level comparison between the Zaharian Empire and what they now understood of human society. The display showed parallel timelines of development, the Zaharians focusing on increasingly efficient methods of warfare and conquest, the humans apparently pursuing knowledge across multiple disciplines simultaneously. Where Zaharian science served military expansion, human science seemed driven by curiosity itself, branching into theoretical realms that had practical applications only generations later. This simulation, explained Grand Scientist Mevrex, who had been called upon to present the analysis, projects the developmental trajectories of both civilizations based on current trends. Even with a complete reallocation of resources to scientific pursuit, we would not achieve human-equivalent technology for approximately 300 years. A shocked murmur ran through the assembly. 3 centuries of vulnerability, Admiral Vosher interjected. 3 centuries during which any species with similar technology could end our civilization on a whim. Perhaps, Mavrex acknowledged, but the alternative is permanent technological inferiority. The gap will only widen if we maintain our current priorities. Emperor Zarhul raised a hand for silence. I have spent 3 days in consultation with our greatest minds from every field. I have reviewed our history, our achievements, and our limitations. He paused, his massive form seeming to bear the weight of the entire empire. And I have reached a decision. The chamber fell absolutely silent, effective immediately. I am ordering a fundamental restructuring of imperial priorities. Military spending will be reduced by 60% over the next 5 years, with resources redirected to basic scientific research, education, and the establishment of new research institutions focused on space-time physics and quantum manipulation theory. The uproar was deafening. Military leaders shouted objections. Governors protested the economic disruption such changes would cause. Industrialists whose fortunes depended on military contracts called for the emperor's advisors to be replaced. Zarhul let the chaos continue for precisely 1 minute before slamming his ceremonial staff against the floor. The sound, cutting through the din like a physical force. This is not a proposal, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. This is an imperial decree. Those who cannot adapt to our new direction will be replaced. The shock of such a direct threat from the normally diplomatic emperor silenced even the most vocal opponents. For millennia, Zarhul continued, we have defined strength through our ability to conquer. We measured our worth by the number of species who bent to our will, the territories we claimed, the resources we exploited. We believed this was the natural order, that power flowed from the barrel of a disruptor cannon. He gestured to the holographic display, still showing the vast technological gap between their civilizations. We were wrong. True power, it seems, flows from understanding. The humans didn't defeat our fighters in combat. They simply operated on a level of reality we barely comprehend. They didn't need to destroy us because, to them, we posed no more threat than a primitive tribe with stone spears would to us. The Emperor's 4 eyes surveyed the assembly, challenging anyone to dispute his assessment. None did. But unlike a primitive tribe, he continued, we have the capacity to learn. We possess the foundation of scientific understanding necessary to begin the journey these humans have already undertaken. It will not be easy. It will not be quick. But it is the only path that offers our civilization a future worthy of its past. Slowly, reluctantly, heads began to nod. Even some of the military leaders seemed to be reconsidering their positions. Admiral Kexthal, the Emperor said, turning to where the frontier commander stood with Commander Veltar. You will oversee the initial transition. Your station will be converted from a military outpost to our first advanced physics research center. Commander Veltar will serve as its chief scientific officer." Kextul bowed deeply, hiding his surprise. He had expected resistance, demotion, perhaps even execution for his heretical proposals. Instead, he was being entrusted with implementing them. "As for the rest of you," the Emperor continued, addressing the assembled leaders, "you have a choice. Embrace our new direction and find your place within it, or step aside for those who will. The Zaharian Empire will emerge from this transformation stronger than ever before, not as conquerors, but as discoverers." With that declaration, Emperor Zarhul descended from his ceremonial platform and walked from the chamber, leaving behind a council in turmoil, a civilization at a crossroads, and the first seeds of a transformation that would alter the course of galactic history. 1 year later, Admiral Kexthal, now bearing the newly created title of Director of Imperial Research, stood in what had once been the command center of Station Alpha 9. The military consoles and tactical displays had been replaced by advanced research equipment. Where officers had once monitored enemy movements, scientists now studied the fundamental fabric of reality. "The latest test results are promising," Commander Veltar reported, joining him at the observation window. In the vast chamber beyond, a prototype quantum field manipulator pulsed with carefully controlled energy as researchers recorded its effects on a suspended test object. "Define promising," Kexthul said, his tone light, despite the intensity of his gaze. The past year had changed him profoundly. The rigid military bearing remained, but his perspective had expanded beyond recognition. "We've achieved a 0.001% reduction in the test object's mass energy coefficient," Veltar replied. "It's a tiny effect, but it confirms our theoretical model. We're manipulating the relationship between matter and space-time, just as we observed the humans doing." Kexthal nodded, satisfaction evident in his posture. "And the practical applications? Decades away at minimum," Veltar admitted. "But we're asking the right questions now." "That's more than we could say a year ago." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Grand Scientist Mavrex, his ancient form supported by a hover chair. Despite his age, the physicist had insisted on relocating to the station to oversee the research personally. "Celebrating our success, are we?" the old scientist asked, a knowing gleam in his eyes. "Acknowledging progress," Kexthal corrected. "The celebration comes when we achieve practical space-time manipulation." Mavrex chuckled. Always the military mind, focused on the objective rather than the journey. He gestured toward the researchers beyond the window. "Look at them. Director, a year ago, half of those brilliant minds were designing more efficient ways to destroy. Now, they're expanding the boundaries of knowledge itself." Kexthal couldn't deny the transformation. The station that had once been a symbol of imperial might had become a beacon of scientific inquiry. Young Zaharians, who would have entered military academies, were now competing fiercely for places in the new Imperial Science Institute. "The latest educational reforms have passed the Council," Mavrex continued. "Starting next cycle, theoretical physics and quantum mechanics will be taught alongside traditional military history in all Imperial schools." "And Admiral Vosher?" Kexthal asked, curious about his former adversary. Mavrex's expression turned wry. "Still grumbling. But even he can't deny the results. The preliminary applications of quantum field theory to navigation alone have increased our fleet's efficiency by 30%. With existing technology, he may not appreciate the philosophy behind our changes, but he respects the practical outcomes." Veltar, who had been monitoring a data stream on her tablet, looked up suddenly. "We're receiving a priority communication from the long-range sensor array in Sector 42. They've detected an anomaly consistent with the space-time distortion signature we observed during the human encounter. Kexthal felt his heart quicken. They've returned? Unknown, Veltar replied, her fingers dancing across the controls. The signature is similar, but not identical. It could be a different vessel, or even a different species using comparable technology. Alert the Emperor, Kexthal decided after a moment's consideration. But let's not overreact. This time, we observe and learn. No interceptors. No show of force. As Veltar moved to implement his orders, Mavrex studied Kexthal with undisguised approval. Quite a journey you've made, Director, from warrior to scientist in a single year. Kexthal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, acknowledging the transformation. Not from warrior to scientist, he corrected. From one who sought power through domination to one who seeks it through understanding. The journey continues. Together, they turned their attention to the sensor readings, their civilization poised on the edge of a new era, one defined not by conquest, but by discovery. 2 years after the initial encounter, Emperor Zarhul stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Imperial Academy of Advanced Physics, watching as young Zaharians, many barely into adulthood, worked through complex equations describing the quantum foam structure of spacetime. Remarkable, he murmured to his aide. 2 years ago, these concepts weren't even taught in our universities. Now they form the foundation of our educational system. The transformation of the Empire had progressed far more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. The initial resistance from military and industrial factions had given way to pragmatic acceptance and, eventually, enthusiastic participation as the first practical applications of the new research began to emerge. Quantum communication systems had already replaced the Empire's traditional subspace network, providing instantaneous, uninterceptable transmission across any distance. Prototype energy systems based on zero-point field manipulation promised to make conventional power generation obsolete within a decade. Even the military, under Admiral Voshar's surprising leadership, had embraced the new paradigm, focusing on understanding rather than simply weaponizing the emerging technologies. Director Kexthal and Commander Veltar have arrived, Your Eminence, the aide announced. They're waiting in the conference chamber with the Galactic Council representatives. The Emperor nodded, taking one last look at the young minds that represented his civilization's future, before turning toward what might be its most significant diplomatic engagement in history. The Galactic Council was a new entity, formed at Zaharian initiative following their paradigm shift. It currently comprised 47 species from across the known galaxy, many of whom had been former adversaries or subjects of the Empire. Now they were partners in what had become the greatest collaborative scientific endeavor ever attempted. As Zarhul entered the conference chamber, the assembled representatives rose in respect, not out of fear, as they once might have, but in genuine acknowledgement of the Emperor's role in catalyzing this unprecedented cooperation. Be seated, Zarhul said, taking his place at the circular table that symbolized the Council's commitment to equality among its members. Director Kexthal, your report. Kexthal, who now served as the Empire's representative to the Council in addition to his research responsibilities, activated the holographic display at the center of the table. It showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy with numerous highlighted points. We've confirmed human activity in 23 distinct regions, he explained. Based on their movement patterns and the frequency of encounters reported by Council members, we estimate they maintain a presence across approximately 30% of the galaxy, despite having a relatively small number of vessels. And still no direct communication, asked the representative from the Thuvian Collective, a species that had nearly gone to war with the Zaharians less than 5 years earlier. None initiated by them, Commander Veltar confirmed. However, Our joint research team has developed a quantum resonance technology that we believe might attract their attention. It's based on the principles we've observed in their space-time manipulation techniques. The Arcturian delegate, whose crystalline form sparkled under the chamber's lights, leaned forward with interest. You propose to signal them directly? Is there not risk in such an approach? Kextel exchanged glances with Veltar before responding. 2 years of observation across multiple encounters by various council species has revealed a consistent pattern. The humans study, but do not interfere. They possess technology that could easily dominate any of our civilizations. Yet they have shown no inclination toward conquest or even formal contact. They're waiting, Emperor Zarhul said quietly, drawing all eyes to him. Waiting for us to demonstrate that we're ready for genuine exchange. The chamber fell silent as the representatives considered this assessment. The quantum resonance beacon, Veltar continued after a moment, would not merely signal our awareness of their presence. It would demonstrate our beginning understanding of the principles their technology employs. It says, in effect, we are studying the same questions you have already answered. And if they respond, Kextel added, the Galactic Council stands ready as a unified body representing diverse approaches to science and culture. We meet them not as separate, competing species, but as a collaborative seeking knowledge. Discussion erupted around the table. Questions about implementation, debates over potential risks, suggestions for modifications to the approach. But underlying it all was a sense of purpose and unity that would have been unimaginable in the days when the Zaharian Empire had dominated through military might rather than scientific leadership. As the session progressed, Emperor Zarhul found his attention drawn back to the holographic display, showing the regions of human activity. Somewhere out there, a civilization that had mastered principles his people were just beginning to grasp was watching. Waiting, perhaps hoping that others would join them in their exploration of reality's deepest mysteries. We will be ready, he promised silently. Not as conquerors, but as students of the cosmos. Diso, on the human colony world of New Terra, Captain Jake Morrison sat at an outdoor cafe, enjoying the simple pleasure of real coffee as he watched twin suns set over an azure ocean. After 3 years of deep space exploration, the shore leave was well earned. Mind if I join you? Dr. Amy Stone asked, approaching his table with her own steaming cup. Morrison gestured to the empty chair. Please. I was just contemplating the sunset and feeling philosophical. Dangerous territory, Stone quipped as she sat. Especially for a starship captain. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two colleagues who had faced the unknown together often enough to appreciate quiet moments. I've been reviewing the latest data from the Xenoanthropology Division, Stone said eventually. There's been an interesting development in the Orion sector. Morrison raised an eyebrow. The Zaharians. She nodded. Remember that militaristic empire we encountered 3 years ago? The ones who tried to intimidate us with their fighters? Vividly, Morrison admitted. I had nightmares about accidentally triggering an interstellar incident for weeks afterward. Protocol said minimal intervention. But I sometimes wonder if we should have established communication. Well, it seems our brief visit had quite an impact, Stone said, activating a small holographic projector on the table. It displayed a series of images showing Zaharian vessels, space stations, and what appeared to be scientific installations. They've undergone a remarkable societal transformation. Military spending down 60%. Scientific research up over 200%. They've even formed some sort of collaborative council with species they were previously subjugating. Morrison studied the images with growing astonishment. All this from one encounter? Apparently so, Stone confirmed. Though I suspect it was less about us specifically and more about what we represented. proof that their entire technological paradigm was limited. We happened to be the catalyst. But the potential for change must have already existed within their society. Still, Morrison mused, it's humbling to think that a routine survey mission could trigger such profound changes. Stone smiled. It's why we have the minimal intervention policy. Advanced technology can appear godlike to less developed civilizations. Sometimes just knowing what's possible is enough to change everything. The server, a young colonist who seemed oblivious to their discussion of interstellar affairs, refilled their coffee cups. When she had gone, Morrison leaned forward. The Curiosity is scheduled for a refit and upgrade next month, he said. They're installing the new timeline manipulation suite. Apparently, we'll be able to observe temporal variations without creating paradoxical distortions. Playing with the fabric of time itself, Stone said, shaking her head in wonder. Sometimes I think we're advancing too quickly. It was only 50 years ago that we achieved the first space-time fold. And now, we're talking about manipulating temporal flow as casually as previous generations discussed fuel efficiency. Morrison understood her concern. Humanity's technological progress had accelerated exponentially since the breakthrough, each discovery opening doors to possibilities that had once seemed like pure fantasy. The Ethics Council is still setting strict parameters, he assured her. Observation only. No alterations to established timelines. Besides, we're still rookies in the cosmic scheme of things. The Andromeda signals suggest civilizations that mastered these principles millions of years ago. Stone's expression turned thoughtful. Do you ever wonder if someone did to us what we inadvertently did to the Zaharians? Some advanced species that passed through our solar system demonstrated technology beyond our comprehension and sparked our own scientific revolution? It's certainly possible. Morrison acknowledged. The mathematical principles behind space-time manipulation were theorized centuries before we achieved practical application. Maybe someone gave our ancestors a glimpse of what was possible. Their philosophical discussion might have continued, but Morrison's communication device chimed with a priority alert. He checked the message, his expression shifting to one of professional interest. The Zaharians have activated some sort of quantum resonance beacon, he reported. It's crude by our standards, but the principles are sound. They're trying to get our attention. Stone's eyes widened. Are they ready for direct contact? The cultural implications could be enormous. Morrison considered the question carefully. As a starship captain, he had significant discretion in first contact scenarios, but this situation went beyond standard protocols. I think, he said slowly, this might be one for the Cultural Exchange Division to evaluate. If the Zaharians have truly transformed from a conquest-driven empire to a knowledge-seeking collaboration, it represents one of the most rapid and profound societal evolutions we've ever documented. Stone nodded in agreement. From warriors to scholars in 3 years, it's almost unprecedented. As they discussed the implications, neither noticed the elderly gentleman at the next table, who had been quietly listening to their conversation while appearing to focus on an antique printed book. Had they paid attention, they might have recognized one of humanity's pioneering theorists in space-time physics, the very scientist whose equations had led to the breakthrough 50 years earlier. The old man smiled to himself as he turned a page. The universe, he had long maintained, was not merely stranger than humans imagined, but stranger than they could imagine. And yet, with each discovery, with each encounter between different intelligences pursuing similar questions from different starting points, that imagination expanded. The Zaharians had taken their first steps onto a path that humanity had been traveling for generations. Other species across the galaxy were doing the same, each approaching the fundamental mysteries of existence from their unique evolutionary and cultural perspectives. Someday, perhaps, all these paths would converge, and when they did, the real exploration would begin. Eyes. Emperor Zarhul stood alone on the observation platform of the quantum resonance beacon, a massive structure that represented the pinnacle of Zaharian scientific achievement. The facility stretched for kilometers across what had once been a military testing range. Its intricate array of field generators and particle accelerators pulsing with energy as they projected a precisely modulated signal into the fabric of space-time itself. 3 years had passed since a single human vessel had shattered the Empire's complacency and set it on a new course. 3 years of intense research, societal transformation, and galactic cooperation. Now they waited, hoping their signal would be recognized for what it was, not a challenge, but an invitation. "Your Eminence," came a respectful voice from behind him. Kextel approached, his once military bearing now tempered by the thoughtful posture of a scientist. "The council representatives have arrived. They await you in the conference chamber." Zarhul nodded, taking one last look at the pulsing heart of the beacon before turning to follow his most trusted advisor. "Any response to our signal?" "Not yet," Kextel admitted. "But our understanding of quantum resonance communication is still rudimentary. It could take time for them to notice, or to decide whether to respond." As they walked through corridors lined with research laboratories and lecture halls, Zarhul reflected on the journey his civilization had undertaken. The transformation had not been without cost. Traditional power structures had been disrupted, cultural identities challenged, economic systems redesigned. Some had resisted fiercely, a few still did. But the evidence of progress was undeniable. The conference chamber, when they entered it, contained a more diverse gathering than would ever have been possible in the old empire. Representatives from 47 species sat around a circular table, engaged in animated discussion. Some had once been enemies, others subjects, a few distant trading partners. Now they were colleagues in the greatest scientific collaboration ever attempted in this part of the galaxy. "The beacon functions exactly as designed," announced the chief physicist. A brilliant Thuvian, whose species had been at war with the Zaharians less than a decade earlier. "The quantum signature should be detectable by any civilization capable of manipulating space-time fields." And if they respond," added Commander Veltar, who now served as chief liaison between Zaharian research teams and their council counterparts. "The modulation pattern we've embedded contains the foundational mathematical principles we've discovered, demonstrating our understanding." Discussion flowed around the table. Technical details, philosophical implications, practical considerations. Zarhul listened with pride. This was the true strength of their new approach. Diverse perspectives united by shared curiosity. Each species contributing unique insights drawn from their evolutionary and cultural history. A sudden commotion at the chamber entrance drew all eyes. A young Zaharian scientist, still in laboratory attire, burst in, protocol forgotten in her excitement. "Your Eminence honored representatives," she exclaimed, breathless. "We've received a response." The chamber erupted in questions, but Zarhul raised a hand for silence. "Explain, scientist." "The quantum resonance pattern has been answered," she said, struggling to find words for the unprecedented event. "But not through the beacon. Somehow, they've responded directly to our main research facility. There's a presence in our central computing network. It's communicating through mathematical sequences, sharing— I can hardly believe it. Sharing theoretical frameworks for advanced space-time manipulation." For a moment, no one spoke. The implications were staggering. "They're teaching us," Kextel said softly, "responding to our signal by sharing knowledge." Veltar was already moving toward the exit. "We need to analyze this immediately. If they're offering direct insights into their theoretical understanding, go, Zarhul commanded. All of you, this is what we've worked toward. As the chamber emptied, scientists of every species rushing toward the research facility, Zarhul remained seated, momentarily overwhelmed by the significance of what was occurring. 3 years ago, his civilization had defined itself through military might and territorial control. Now it stood at the threshold of an entirely different form of power, the power of understanding. Your Eminence? Kexthul had remained behind, watching his leader with concern. Are you not joining the research team? Zarhul smiled, rising from his seat. I was just thinking, old friend, about how sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquering others, but from conquering our own limitations. He gestured toward the door. Come. History awaits, and this time, we're writing it with equations instead of weapons. Together, they walked toward a future that neither could have imagined 3 years before, a future where the Zaharian Empire had transformed from conqueror to student, and discovered that this was, perhaps, the greatest conquest of all. Far across the galaxy, in a dimension slightly adjacent to conventional spacetime, entities that had once been human observed the unfolding events with satisfaction. They had long since transcended the biological limitations of their origins. Their consciousness expanded through technologies that had begun with simple spacetime manipulation and evolved into something far more profound. The Zaharians are progressing even more rapidly than projected, noted the entity that had once been Captain Jake Morrison. Their quantum resonance beacon was crude, but conceptually sound. Their collaborative approach accelerated their development, responded the consciousness that had been Dr. Amy Stone. Bringing diverse species together multiplied their theoretical insights exponentially. The entities communicated not through language as humans would understand it, but through direct conceptual exchange, pure thought unbounded by words. Around them, the fabric of reality itself responded to their presence, shifting and flowing like a living thing. Is it time for direct contact? Asked a third consciousness, one that had been observing galactic development for far longer than the others. The Morrison entity considered this. They're still transitioning from a conquest paradigm to a knowledge paradigm. The process is incomplete. Direct contact might disrupt their natural development. Yet we've provided theoretical frameworks through their network, the Stone entity pointed out. That itself is a form of intervention, a measured response to their own initiative, countered Morrison. We're not imposing knowledge, merely acknowledging their readiness to receive specific insights they've already begun to formulate independently. The third consciousness, vast and patient, encompassed their discussion with something akin to amusement. You both still think in such linear terms? The Zaharians' transformation was never contingent on your encounter with them. It was always a potential path in their developmental spacetime manifold. You simply represented one possible catalyst among many. Both younger entities acknowledged this perspective with respectful recognition. The elder consciousness had experienced many such civilizational transformations over eons of observation. What they become is ultimately their choice. The elder continued, as it was yours, and ours before you. Each intelligence that reaches beyond its origins follows a unique trajectory toward understanding. Some advance through technology, others through philosophy, still others through artistic or conceptual innovation. The paths are infinite, the destination singular. Around them, space-time pulsed with the echoes of countless civilizations, some just beginning their journey toward awareness, others approaching the threshold the humans had crossed generations ago. A few so advanced that even the transcended humans could barely perceive their existence. They build stars for fun now, the Morrison entity observed. directing attention toward a distant region where human children manipulated stellar matter in educational exercises. While elsewhere in the galaxy, species fight wars over planetary resources, the spectrum of development is vast. And endlessly fascinating, agreed the stone entity. Each new perspective enriches the collective understanding. The Zaharians will contribute insights no other species could provide, shaped by their unique evolutionary and cultural history. The elder consciousness expanded, momentarily encompassing a larger portion of the galaxy in its awareness. The resonance pattern is spreading. 7 other developing civilizations have detected the Zaharians' beacon and recognized its significance. A network forms, independent of our influence. The 3 entities observed this emerging pattern with something beyond satisfaction, a recognition of rightness, of potential being fulfilled. They had long since moved beyond the need for direct intervention in galactic affairs, content to observe and occasionally nudge when the moment seemed appropriate. They will find their way, the elder assured the others. As you did, as we all do. The journey from conquest to curiosity is one many intelligences undertake. Those that succeed discover that the universe reveals itself most fully, not to those who seek to dominate it, but to those who approach with wonder. With that shared understanding, the entities shifted their attention elsewhere, leaving the Zaharians and their new galactic partners to continue their exploration. The quantum resonance beacon pulsed steadily, its signal rippling through space-time. Not a declaration of power, but an expression of the most profound question any intelligence can ask. What is there to learn? And across the vastness of the cosmos, other intelligences were answering. In the centuries that followed, the Zaharian transformation became a case study in developmental xenoanthropology, the science of how intelligent species evolve culturally and technologically. What had begun with a chance encounter between an expansionist empire and an advanced exploratory vessel had catalyzed changes that rippled across thousands of worlds and dozens of species. The Galactic Council, initially formed from 47 member species, eventually expanded to include over 300 distinct intelligences, each contributing unique perspectives shaped by their evolutionary history and cultural development. Together, they advanced understanding of the universe at a pace none could have achieved alone. The humans, having achieved their own transcendence, maintained a benevolent distance, occasionally guiding when invited, teaching when asked, but never imposing their perspectives on developing civilizations. They had learned through their own journey that true advancement came not from external direction, but from internal transformation. And at the heart of the Council's greatest research institution, built on what had once been the Zaharian Empire's primary military academy, stood a simple monument, a holographic representation of the first human vessel the Zaharians had encountered, alongside the words that Emperor Zarhul had spoken at the pinnacle of their transformation. The measure of a civilization is not found in its capacity to conquer, but in its courage to question. Beneath it, generations of young scientists from hundreds of worlds gathered to begin their own journeys of discovery, not as conquerors, but as students of a universe whose mysteries remained endless, and whose greatest lessons were learned not through domination, but through wonder.